Hello there, boys and girls. In today's video, I want to show you how you can develop your web development skills and how to go about mastering something in the most effective way possible. So if you're interested in videos like this and many other topics, be sure to subscribe. I am Yash and I code stuff. So let's talk about learning something. In an ideal situation, there are two criteria that you use to measure the effectiveness of your learning process: the amount of time it takes to learn something and the amount of energy spent during that time. So when it comes to the optimization for the best result, it really becomes a question of which criteria you want to reduce. Some processes will take less time but a lot of energy, and some will take less energy but a longer time. And in any case, neither of these criteria will ever be zero. Also, by energy, I mean stuff like number of steps, number of external factors, and the complexity of each step. And things like that, not calories. This applies to everything you want to learn. For web development, the most optimized option would be to look at a website and try to replicate it the best you can. And to reduce the number of steps, you should try to master design first and then think about functionality. Design is actually the hard part that you want to overcome first. This was a thing I wish I knew when I was starting off, but if you're able to successfully replicate a modern web page, you are on the right path, because this process will keep you up to date with modern conventions. It is easy to get left behind in the field of computer science, and I'm actually getting kind of bored talking about this subject. Also, the quote of today is probably not from Thomas Edison. "'Tis not that I failed 2,000 times in making the light bulb, 'tis only that I learned 2,000 ways of how not to make the light bulb." Also 2,000 ways to be an absolute douchebag. So let's take a look at what we're going to be making. So this is W3 School. This website is what we're going to be replicating today. If you want to know exactly what we're going to be doing, this website has a header, it has a top nav, it has a side nav, and it has content. And what we'll be doing is we'll be taking all of these things and making it by ourselves. The resources we're going to be using are some fonts. So I'm going to be using Poppins. You can use whatever you want. Specifically, I'm going to be using the Light 300. And what you have to do is go to Google Fonts, look for Poppins, and then click whatever you want, and then come here. Either use link or the CSS import. And then all you have to do is set your font family to sans serif Poppins sans serif. The next resource we are going to be using is the Materialize Icons library. This thing has a bunch of icons and it's all free and everything. Also, I think Materialized Icons or Materialized CSS is actually supported by Google. So all you have to do is go to their website and look for this link right here and paste it into wherever you want those icons to be. Coming to our own website, the stuff we are going to be making, it's going to be looking like this. This also has a header, it has a top nav, it has a side nav, a little bit of linking, and a good amount of content. We also are going to replicate the footer. I didn't show that in the W3 School, but that also exists. And the main part that I want to show how to do is this. If I scroll down, my top nav sticks to the top of the page. It doesn't just escape the site. This is the same thing that goes on over here as well in W3 School. When you scroll up all the way, the header is visible, but then if you scroll down, the top nav sticks to the top of the web page. And that's one thing that we're going to take a look at. We're also going to be taking a look at how to do these tip things and also how to do code. Let's look at one over here. So the W3 School has something written in their library CSS files that colors the code, meaning the variable has a blue color, the variable name has a black color, the value has red, and stuff like that. We're going to be using a different color palette. Ours is going to look something like this. And we have the tips thing as well. So yeah, let's get on with the code. Word of warning, this is probably going to be a pretty large video and I'd recommend breaking it down and just following along whenever you want. Don't watch it all at one go because then you'll probably forget what happened before and after. To get started, you'll need an index.html file. You will also need an index.css file. In your index.html file, start with making the boilerplate code. That would be exclamation and enter if you have Emmet. I'm also just going to copy paste the links that I talked about that we're going to use, and also import the index.css file. In your body, the first thing we will need is an app, and in here we'll have a few things. The first one being header. The next thing will be the top nav. Next is the side nav, and the last one is content. Inside the header, we are going to have two nav bars. One's going to be all of this stuff, and the other is going to be all of this stuff. So let's make a class for navbar and make two of them. The first navbar will have 4 options in it. So let's do that now. .opt*4. The first option is going to be the logo, and it will have the material icons class as well. And what we want is the blur on, and if you do this and open it up with live server, okay, so what you need to do is blur underscore on, and we'll have this thing right here. That's going to be our logo for this video. The second option will have a title saying tutorials. It will also have a materialized icons class. And in here we'll need a drop down arrow. All we need to do now is replicate this 2 more times. And instead of tutorials, let's write references. And instead of this one, let's write exercises. Let's check that out. That looks proper. The second navbar will have 2 options. So .navbar, and then in there .opt*2. The first one will have a title in it called paid courses. And the second one will have a button in it, so .btn, and then log in. That works perfectly. That should be all for the header. So I'll close that, and let's go to top nav. The top nav will also have 2 nav bars. In the first nav bar, put in about 11 options. The first will have the material icons class, and in here you can write home. The rest will have titles. I'm going to fill this up with HTML, CSS, and stuff like that. You can put in whatever you want. Okay, so that works. So the second nav bar will have 3 OPTs with materialized icons inside of them. So let's do that. The first one will be forum, the next one will be contacts, and the last one will be class. And that should look good. I'm going to close the top nav now, and let's head to side nav. The side nav is actually pretty simple. It's only going to have a title and a list with a bunch of options in it, and then a link wrapper with some links in it. So let's do a title saying articles, and then a list with, let's give it 20 options. And then let's add a wrapper for some link. And let's give 5 links in there. The first one can be home, the next is about, next could be YouTube, maybe Twitter, and GitHub. That looks about right. Coming to the very difficult part, which would be the content. This will have a lot of things in it, and so I'll take it a little more slowly. Also, let's get rid of this. Yeah. The first thing is going to be an article tag. And in here, let's do an H1 saying learning HTML. And now let's create a navbar for the buttons to go from one page to another. So dot navbar, and in here we'll have straight up buttons. The first button will have a arrow pointing to the left, and the next one will have an arrow pointing to the right. So we'll use the materialized icons. Material dash icons. In here you'd have to write keyboard arrow left, and then after that all you have to do is write previous. Also, I wrote plural, you should put it singular. Plural is not a thing. And then here you can do next, and here you can do right. And that gives you 2 buttons. Perfect. Let's close up that navbar and head forward. Let's make an H1 with hello written in it. And let's put some lorem ipsum paragraphs. Now all you have to do is just copy this and paste it a bunch of times. And we should have some context. Now let's make that tip thing as well. Somewhere in between, after a paragraph, put in a block quote. In here, the title will be an H3 tag saying tip. And then we can have a paragraph filled with 50 words of lorem. And we can also put a button in it saying try it out. And in here we can also do the rightward arrow thing again with the materialize icon. Let's check that out. That looks fine right now. The next thing, which will be the long part, is going to be putting in some code. So anywhere below a paragraph, put in a div with the class of code. Any code has a bunch of variables. The variables have a bunch of names. There's a bunch of symbols, and there's also a bunch of objects and properties and stuff like that. So we'll have to account for some of those for this example. So let's do that right now. Let's make a class called variable and say var. I'm hoping this would be JavaScript. And then a div with the class of name, and we can put x. The next would be a symbol, which could be an equal to sign. Okay, so all of these need to be span, so I'm going to change that right now. And let's check that out. All the way over here, yes. Let's do a value and another symbol for the semicolon. So dot value, let's do 10, and then a dot symbol, semicolon. Oh, those are divs again. Okay, let's copy this one more time and change the variable and value if you want to y and something else. And between these two variables, let's put a br so that they're on different lines. And that looks good. That should be enough for the article right now, so I'm going to close that, and we're going to come to the footer. In here we'll have a navbar, and this will have 4 buttons in it, or options. The first one could be report issue. The next could be checkout app. The next one could be about us. And merch. Always merch. And then after the navbar we can do more content. So dot more dash content, and in here we could have a bunch of lists. So I'll go with 4 lists because that's symmetric, meaning since we have 4 options, there will also be 4 lists that will be right below the options, and it will look nice. So let's do dot list times 4, and in here let's put a bunch of options, dot opt, and let's just copy and paste that everywhere else. Also, each list should have a title in it as well. So put a dot title, and let's do learn HTML, another dot title with learn CSS, and again. And again. Let's check that out. Actually, let's get rid of all the OPTs again and instead fill it up with tutorials. So dot OPT with and a dollar sign. Multiply that by 10. And then let's just copy that. And that looks great. The next thing our footer has is a credits section. So I'm going to close all the lists and we'll head to that. So write dot credits and in here just put in some lorem ipsum, and anywhere there's a comma, let's just put a BR. Let's check that out. Perfect. And as a finale, we'll have a logo in there as well. That will be outside credits. So dot logo dot material icons. And that should be all the HTML we need, hopefully. Coming to the long and extensive part of CSS. First, let's select everything and set the box sizing to border box. Let's also get rid of the margin and padding and set the font family to Poppins and sans serif if you want. To do that, press star and in here, do box sizing to border box. Let's also do padding to 0 and margin to 0. Also font family to Poppins. Let's check that out. And everything's working. So the body lost its margin, which is generally a good idea to do. And all the text is Poppin. Next up is the app. And this will be fairly simple as well. So in the app, we want its width to be 100 VW. And for now, let's just keep its min height to 200 VH so that we can experiment around with the scroll. So width 100 VW and min height to 200 VH. Let's also give it a position of relative. That way we can position everything inside of it relative to where the app is. So dot header comes next. Let's give it a width of 100% and also display to flex and justify content to space between. That way the two nav bars will be as far away as possible with each other. So display flex, justify content to space between. Let's check that out. Let's also give it a width of 100%. So by mistake, what I did was I put the second nav bar inside the first nav bar. What you have to do is put that inside the second nav bar. Let's try that out. And yeah, the login and the other thing is also over here. Let's get going by giving it a padding of 0 and 1 EM. So the left and right will have some padding so that the stuff on the left and right doesn't exactly stick to the edges. Let's also give it a font size of 1.5 EM and a font weight of bolder. Okay, coming to the logo. So since it's inside of the header, let's do dot header dot logo. And what we need to do in here is give it a larger font size. So I'm going to go with 3M, and let's also do important. And let's change the color to some variant of teal. My to-go colors are around teal because they look pretty nice. I'm gonna go with something bright. And let's check that out. Huh. Alright, I put it directly inside. And that works. Next up is the nav bar. inside the header, what we need to do here is pretty simple. Set the display to flex. That way everything will be in one line. Perfect. And now comes the options inside the navbar. So dot header dot navbar dot opt. In here, all we need to do is center the text and the arrow. We also need to set the cursor to pointer, and let's also give it some padding as well in the left and right directions. So set the display to flex, align items to center, justify content to center as well, and then let's do cursor to pointer, and then the last thing is padding of 0 and 0.2 em. That's starting to look like something right now. That's pretty cool. Now, if the option has a materialize icon CSS thing inside of it, what we need to do is increase the size a little bit, font size, so that it looks nicer. So .opt, and inside of this, material-icons. Let's set the font size to 1.5 em. Looks pretty cool. Now the header options should exhibit the hover property as well. All we would need to do here is set the color to something different. Again, I'm gonna go with something related to teal. So dot header, and inside here dot opt, set the color to teal, and then let's modify it, and let's check that out. Whoops, I forgot there's a colon hover, and perfect. That looks cool. And do these work? Yep, perfect. Let's work with the button now as well. The header had a login button inside of it. So what we would need to do is give it some padding on all sides, but kind of different. The top and bottom doesn't need to be too much. Let's also make it a little more rounded and give it a teal background color and some white color text. So do .opt inside of here .btn. Set the padding to 0.5 em and 2 em. Let's set the border radius to 1 em, and also background color to teal and color to white. That looks cool. Which means now we are going to be working with the top nav. This will be the interesting part that we are looking for. So top dash nav. The first thing we want to do with top nav is, since we want it to stick to the top whenever we scroll, we don't want it to be on the same three-dimensional plane as all our text and the content. So firstly, we'd have to set the z index to something above 0 and 1. So let's do z index to 100. Now the way you make that sticky thing happen is by setting the position to sticky and setting the top to 0. What this does is, if the top nav is around the edge of the page, the upper edge of the page, it will not go any further. It will just stay there forever. Unless you scroll all the way up again, in which case it'll go back to its normal position. Let's give it a width of 100%, set the display to flex. Let's also justify content with space between. I want to give it a good looking background color, and it needs to be dark. I love dark. Let's do RGB of 36, 30, and 48 should be nice. Let's check it out. That works, but it's too big. So let's play around with what we can do with that. Firstly, let's set the color to white and give it a box shadow on the bottom side. So the way you would do that is set the X offset to 0, set the Y offset to 8 pixels. The next two will be 4 pixels and -4 pixels. And let's also set the RGBA to 0, 0, 0, 0.5. And there's a box shadow on the downward side perfectly. Let's also give it a left and right padding again. Let's do 1 em. That's looking proper, I guess. So the top nav has a nav bar inside of it. So the next thing we need to do is target that. Top dash nav, and inside of it dot nav bar. Simply setting the display to flex should be fine, so set the display to flex. And everything's in one line exactly. The next thing we need to do is target the options inside of the nav bar inside of the top nav. So dot top nav. Let's set the display to flex, align items to center. Let's set the justify content to center as well. Let's do a font size of 1.2 em and a good amount of padding on all sides. 0.5 em should do. Let's also set the cursor to pointer. Let's check that out. That looks pretty good. We're almost there. So the next thing we need to do is do the hover property for the options inside this nav bar. So what I'm going to do is just copy this and paste it here, do colon hover. And all we need to do is set the background color to something nice. Let's go with RGB 2,70,70 and let's check that out. Perfect. Now, I also want to show that one of the buttons or one of the options has been selected. So let's actually head back to the top nav and let's do HTML selected. So inside the option for HTML, do selected. And let's make that class right now. So dot selected, and let's set the background color to teal. Let's see if that worked. And it did. That looks great. So the next step is going to be side nav. What we need to do is going to be kind of similar to what we did with the top nav, which means we'd have to set the position to sticky and set it to a little bit below the top edge of the screen, which would mean just setting the top property to 2.5 em for our case, or at least my case. You should play around with these values on your own as well. So dot side nav position to sticky, top to 2.5 em. Let's give it a height of 100 vh. Let's give it a width of 15%. Let's also give it a padding of 1 em in all directions. And a good, slightly darker background color. So RGB 212, 212, 212 should do good. Let's see. That's kind of working. That's working. That's working fine. Let's set this to 100, not 10. And that looks beautiful. So if you notice, the sticky nav bar thing is working. And that's actually what all you had to do. And let's get inside the sidebar again, side nav again. So the first thing it has is a title. So let's program that. Set its font size to 2em. That's all we need to do. The next thing is the list. So side nav dot list. Set the height to 50 vh. Let's do overflow y to auto. Let's also give it a width of 100%. Let's make it a proper column by setting the display to flex and flex direction to column. Let's also give it a larger font size and a bottom border. To do that, all you have to do is font size 1.5 em and a border bottom of 1 pixel solid RGB of 175. Let's check that out. And it looks pretty cool. It's working. Perfect. Next up is the link wrapper. So dot side nav and link dash wrapper. All we need to do here is set the height to 100%, set the display to flex, flex direction to column, and align items to center. And that way we have that part as well. The links inside the link wrapper are also going to be programmed. All we need to do is set the text align to center, give it a full width, so 100%. Let's give it a top and bottom margin as well, and some different color, something a little darker. So dot side nav dot link wrapper dot link, and in here width of 100%, text align center, margin of 1 EM and 0, and then color of RGB 100. Let's check that out. That looks beautiful. Very proud of this. Oh yeah, I'm also going to add a hover property to the list options. So let's copy this part over here and do .opt. Let's give it a slightly nicer background color. And that works. That is great. Next up, we're going to program the content, which will take most of our time in this case. So the first thing you want to do is set the position to absolute. So dot content position absolute. We'll give it a top of 150 pixels, and let's give it a left of 15% or whatever the width is for our side nav. And that way it's going to be up here and not behind the nav bar or the side nav. Let's also give it a good width of 75% because the nav bar or the side nav is 15% and we need it to be 100 to occupy properly. That looks good. Let's keep going. Let's do the article next. It will have a width of 100%. Let's give it a border to the right of 1 pixel solid RGB 212. That. Perfect. Let's also give it a padding of 1 EM on all directions. That way it won't stick to anything, and sticking is always bad. You need good white spacing. In the article, there's also the nav bar for these two buttons. So what we want to do with them is one will be over here and the other will be all the way over here. So the container for them, which is the nav bar, will have a width of 100%. Let's set the display to flex, and let's also do align item center and justify content space between. Article, and in here nav bar. Let's give it a width of 100%. Let's give it a display of flex. Let's give it an align items of center and justify content space between. That looks good. Perfect. Now comes the button inside the article. Let's get rid of the outline and border. So outline to 0, border to 0 as well. Let's give it a background color of teal. Let's give it a small padding as well. 0.2 EM should do. Let's give it a color of white. Let's give it a font weight of bolder. And then the regular stuff, centering everything that's inside and things like that. So let's check that out. That looks fine. Perfect. Let's also give it a larger font size. So let's do 1.5 M. Perfection. Should I give it a constant width instead of whatever it's doing right now? Maybe. Let's do that. Let's give it a width of 10 VW, or let's give it a min width of 10 VW. Perfect. That looks great. All the buttons inside of our article will have the same theme going around, and that's exactly what we want. The next thing we're going to do is the hover property for the buttons. So let's try that out. I'm going to copy this, plug it here, hover. Let's set the background color to something darker teal, something like that. Perfect. It looks like it's hovered. Yep. Next up is the header or the H1 tags. Let's set the font size to 3M. Let's give it a color of something not black, something a little lighter than black. I generally go with 52 or 59. It doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it's good. Let's give it a margin top and bottom of 0.5 M and 0. That's starting to look good. Now, the H1 tags are going to be common, but we also have a title, the main title of the article. So let's also program that. Article.title. And in here, let's give it a width of 100%. Let's give it a text align of center and make the color black to fully emphasize on it. And it's not working? Let's check that out. Content, article, class navbar h1. Yep, this one. I didn't give it a class of title, so let's do that. Yeah. Perfect. That's exactly where we want it to be. Next up is the paragraphs. All we need to do is give it a slightly larger font size. So all you need to do is article p font size of 1.2 should do. It's more readable now. Perfect. And then let's program the tips right now. So article is the block quote. So in here, what we need to do is set the background color to something yellowish, just like W3 School has. So I'm gonna go with 255, 227, and 134. Let's check that out. And it looks good, I guess. Let's give it a padding of 1 and let's also give it a top and bottom margin. Perfection. Now comes the complicated part. So the code thing. What it will have, the main container of all the code, it will have a darker background color. We also need to physically change the font family to Courier New. We will also give it a width of 50%. So let's just get coding. The background color will be slightly bluish but very dark. So 22, 26, 43 works for me all the time. Let's check that out. Oh, wait, RGB. Yeah, that's a good background color for coding. Let's give it a base color of white, so that will be the default. Let's give it a width of 50% and a margin of 1 EM and 0. Let's give it a padding of 0.5 EM as well. Let's set the font family to Courier. Let's check that out. That looks fairly good. Coming to the stuff inside of the code, so the first thing we program is the variable. So code in here, variable. All we need to do for these things are to set the font color to something, or the text color to something. So color, I'm going with orange. And the next thing is dot code, the name of a variable. Let's set the color to salmon. Next up is the value. Let's give it a greenish color. So RGB 175, 244, and 96. That's already looking absolutely amazing. Coming to the footer, what we need here is to give it a margin top of a very large amount. So margin dash top to 10 That looks about right. Let's do a display of flex. Let's give it a flex direction of column and align items to center. Let's also give it a border top. That looks nice. Let's do 1 pixel solid RGB of, let's go at 175. That looks amazing. Yeah, perfect. Next up is the footer's navbar. So dot footer dot navbar. Width would be 100%. Let's give it a display of flex. Align items to center. Let's give it a justify content of space evenly. That's nice. Yeah, I like that. Next up, it's going to be the options inside of the navbar. Let's play along and try that out. .opt, the padding will be 1 It'll have a width of 100%, a background of RGB 218, I guess. Yeah. Let's give it a margin of 1 as well, and a text align. Let's also set the color to black. Let's give it the hover as well. All we need to do here is set the background color to something slightly darker. So let's select that out. Right about there should do. Perfect. Now comes the more content. So dot footer, in here, more content. This will have a width of 100%, and we will justify content to space evenly so that it matches the positioning of our buttons, the navbar buttons. So let's do that by giving it a width of 100%. Let's set the display to flex, justify content to space evenly. Let's also give it a border to the top of 1 pixel solid 175 should do. Yeah. It's taking shape. That's pretty cool. I'm pretty sure I forgot to put the list thing inside the HTML part of the more content. So I'm gonna copy that from somewhere and put that in. Perfect. So coming to the more contents list, this will have a display of flex. Let's set the align items to center. Let's also do flex direction column. Inside the list, there's also titles, so let's play along with that. All we need to do here is set the font size to 1.5 em, font weight to bolder. Perfect. For the credits, all we have to do is set the margin top to 2 em and give it a full width. So there's also other stuff. Dot footer, dot credits. In here, margin top of 1 em, or let's give it 2 em. Let's do a width of 100%. Let's do text align center and a border on the top. All right. The footer's logo will have a font size of 5 em and a dark color. So let's do that now. Font size of, let's give it 5 em and a bluish dark color. So color RGB, let's do 2,70,70. And as a final part, we're going to set the option, button, and link to all have the common property of cursor to pointer, just in case we forgot it somewhere. So dot opt, comma, dot ptn, comma, dot link cursor to pointer. And there you have it. It should be good and ready to go. Everything seems to be working, and therefore I will end this video here. If you like this content and want more of it, subscribe. If you liked this video in general, do like. Bye.